I think one thing to note, without being too, don't want to give too many tips away for Vermont's point of view, but they are quite heavy from centre bounce. 90% of their scores have been from centre bounce this year, which is absolutely massive. The second in the competition is 12%, so it's quite ridiculous what they can do.
So does their style of football, do you think that's something that can stand up in finals, and is it sustainable to score that much from clearance? Welcome EFNL fans and to all the other listeners out there. We're doing something a little differently today with the good people of PremierData. Football discussion is often left to the eye test, but this time we'll let the stats guide us as we try to make sense of this weird and wacky Premier Division season. My name is Dylan Smith and I'm joined by Ryan Patterson of PremierData. Ryan, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, Dylan. Keen to talk some stats.
Can you just tell us a bit about how the EFNL use these stats and what we can kind of take out of them?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So it is quite in depth in terms of what we offer to coaches and players and things like that, whether it be the core statistics and quite an in-depth analysis of the game in terms of efficiencies and a breakdown of things such as team involvements and 1%ers and things like that is all included. But then you also have a vision editing sort of package that coaches can utilise and use for feedback as well. So I guess if they want to analyse a vision, sort of create their own reports and edits, they can use that to then publish to players and then sort of use that for revision, as well as opposition analysis and things like that as well.
We'll move on to the top 5 ranked players in the league according to PremierData. Now, I reckon most people will be the most familiar with that, with seeing a graphic come up on social media where it's got, someone's had 21 tackles or 50 touches or whatever. And then it'll have a little thing down the bottom that says ranking points, but probably most of the listeners won't understand that exactly. So can I get you to just explain a little bit about that first?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, very in-depth. It's probably sort of like a mixture of like a dream team and a super coach sort of thing, in a sense that it sort of takes into account a bit more than dream team in terms of it includes negative points for turnovers, free kicks against, things such as effective kicks and ineffective kicks as sort of different values. There's actually 40 plus different statistics that go into it. So, 1%ers, as I mentioned before, like those chases, spoils, blocks, pressure acts are all worth different amount of points. And as well as that, that's sort of broken up into 3 different zones. So you have defensive 50, forward 50, and a between the arc sort of midfield zone, where some stats are sort of worth different amount of points at times. So an example for that, a turnover in your back 50 is negative 3.5 points. Whereas a turnover forward or in the midfield is negative 3 points. So it's only a slight difference. Purely the reason for that is just basically turn it over in your back 50, you're more likely to concede a score from it. So yeah, that's the biggest difference. And there is quite a bit that goes into it. Obviously some people think it's quite weighted towards midfielders and ruckmans at times, which it can be. But we think it's just sort of the best balance in terms of, showing how the game was played and exactly what players had the best impact on the game as well.
So by the sounds of that, it obviously isn't just raw stats. You can't just rack up the ball. You actually do have to use it, and where you win the ball is important.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you have 50 disposals and they're all uncontested and, kick-ins and turnovers and things like that, it's likely you might not score too well. Whereas if you're in the midfield, you have 25 touches, 20 contested, 10 clearances or something like that. You get 2 points for a clearance, you get an extra 1.5 or 2 for a contested possession, whether it be a loose ball get or a hard ball get. So all that sort of goes into it. And yeah, again, we just think it's sort of the best way to reflect exactly how the game is played.
So we'll jump into that top 5, according to you guys. So who do we have? I'll let you do the honours for number 5. Who is it?
Absolutely. So number 5 at the moment, we have Cade Ainsworth from Blackburn. So a midfielder, doesn't necessarily rack it up as much as some of the other players in the comp and some of the other players that we'll hear later on in this sort of list. But he's number 1 in the comp for tackles. So again, tackles sort of have a different weighting depending where they are on the ground, worth a little bit more in defensive 50 and forward 50 opposed to midfield. But again, so yeah, number 1 in the comp for tackles, also quite good in hard balls, number 3. And then as well, goal assist and total ground ball contested possession, he's top 10 for those as well. So I think Cade was one that we sort of looked into. He was just sort of good at everything. Like he didn't necessarily stand out as an absolute gun on the field.
The all-rounder.
Yeah, exactly right. He sort of does everything, and he also does the team things as well, rather than the flashy things on the field, such as kicking goals and having 40 touches a game and things like that.
We'll jump into number 4. Who have we got there?
Yep, so Simon White, so obviously a little bit different. As I said, midfielders and ruckmen sort of have the weight to them a little bit, but Simon White, again, a little bit different, being an intercept defender. So quite a heavy terms of rating for intercept marks and intercept possessions, which he's ranked number 1 in for both of those categories. Also quite good at contested marks, rebound 50s, and using the ball efficiently as well. So I think that's probably why he's sitting at number 4 as well.
So in a player like that, where is the biggest damage? Because they're obviously getting most of their touches in the back half, which we talked about being probably a less damaging place to get the ball. But what's the biggest impact in a player like that?
I think it's more about intercepts and sort of stopping the other team score more than anything. Obviously, being a defender, you're not going to have as many score involvements or goal assists as such. But if you can be that score launch and you can be the one that's sort of stopping the other team from scoring, then you get the points that you're worth.
Plus, he also does rack up a lot of the ball, as we'll see. So if you're building a team, does he fit in? Is he the first intercept defender that you pick to build that team around?
Yeah, as an intercept defender, absolutely. He's he's good on the ground. He's getting intercept possessions, but then he's also taking those intercept marks, and he's not afraid of a contested mark as well. So he's second in the comp for those. So if you can have a big guy down the line, and the majority of the time he's going up in marks against big fellas as well. So the fact that he's still winning those contests and sort of taking the game on that way, definitely in terms of intercept defenders, he would be the first I'd pick.
You do hear it a lot more with AFL coaches talking about that being the number 1 player in the game at the moment. So we'll move on to number 3. Who have we got there?
Yep, so Michael Wen, obviously a ruckman, is the only ruckman that makes this list. Again, number 1 for hit-outs to advantage in the competition, and he's not actually number 1 for hit-outs, he's number 2, but he's number 1 for ruck gathers. So basically what that means is he's grabbing it out of the ruck more often than not, which is probably why he's number 2 for hit-outs, because he's grabbing it out. If he was just focusing on hit-outs, he'd probably be number 1 in that category, because he's quite good at those. And then sort of linked in with that as well, he's obviously quite good at contested possessions, sort of makes his way around the ground pretty well as well, taking contested marks too. Do
we have a disposal count on him?
I'm not too sure as his specific disposals. I think it's around that 20 mark, but yeah, not an exact number on that.
We watched the match of the day for NAIDOC round a few weeks ago, and he was best on ground in that game. So I have seen that firsthand. There is a bit of a myth, obviously, that this does favour ruckman. Do you think potentially he's too high on that list? Or
I think it's quite a good reflection of it. He, as I said, he's winning contested possessions. He's doing more than just rucking. Like, he's actually having an impact on the game in terms of getting around the ground, taking contested marks, whether that be intercept, excuse me, or up forward as well. So, and then obviously with the hit-outs to advantage, it's quite a good stat in correlating to clearances and things like that as well. We have reduced sort of the value of what a normal hit-out is, so it's only half a point for a hit-out. And 2.5 for a hit-out to advantage. So we think it fairly reflects sort of how they're performing as well. So I think he's rightfully in the 3rd position.
So to number 2, who have we got there?
So Alexander Urban. So again, he's a contested beast, loves a hard ball, loves a clearance, and very good below his knees on the ground. So, and as well as that, the work he does when he doesn't have the ball is number 6 in tackles. So definitely not a one-way running midfielder. He sort of works both ways. And I think, he definitely deserves to be number 2 for his sort of two-way running as well.
This is the second midfielder that's come up on the list so far. So we've got 2 from the top 4 that we've done so far. What's different about him to, say, Cade Answorth, also a midfielder at Blackburn? How do they differ?
I think just pure disposals for this as well. Alexander, obviously, he racks up quite a few more contested possessions. He's number 1 in the comp. Handballs as well, he's quite up there. And I think that correlates to clearances as well. So he's winning those hard balls, and it's correlating to clearances and getting the ball around the ground, and then just the pure number that he's working at as well is probably why he's a little bit further up there.
So just go through that a bit, actually. So you talk about the numbers and you talk about the effect. Where's the tipping point with that as far as, is it more important to get more of the ball or have more impact?
I think more impact. So disposals such as clearances and, actually getting contested possessions, like it's worth a lot more if you're the one winning the ball as opposed to, if Alexander's winning the ball and then handballing it. The guy getting the ball then after that, he's received a handball receive. You don't get any points for that. Whereas if you've actually won the ball, whether it be a hard ball or loose ball, That's either 2 points or 1.5 points respectively. So I think that does take into impact. Obviously clearances are quite a good stat. And then it's broken down further, so like effective clearances and things like that are sort of taken into account, and making sure that the efficiency is there. If you're not efficient with it, you're not going to get the points. So I think that's the biggest difference between those two.
I watched a few of his earlier games and I was probably a little bit snide about him earlier, but when I saw him live, you realise how much, like obviously he wins the ball at the clearance a lot, but he's quite a creative handballer as well, which you probably don't notice that with just the bulk amount of possessions and just winning that hard ball, but he actually is quite creative as well.
Yeah, 100%. And again, that sort of correlates to him being number one in the comp for total handballs. So I think players playing to their strengths is probably the biggest reason that he's there particularly.
So we'll move on to number one on the list. So this is a pretty prestigious position to be. Yeah. Pretty much ranked the number one player in the comp. Who have we got here?
Yeah, quite a good point to hold. So from South Croydon, we have Braden Kilpatrick. So maybe a little bit unexpected. Obviously, he's an absolute star of the competition. Number one for disposals, clearances, goal assists is probably a big one. So again, bringing in that sort of impact type of things. Second for inside 50s, third for contested possessions, and third for handball receives as well. So he's winning the ball around the ground by his work rate, getting the handball receives. But he's also winning his own footy as well. So I think that sort of mixture of winning your own footy, getting it elsewhere, and just a hard running work rate, and as well his own players sort of trusting him with the ball a little bit. You see some teams sort of share it around a little bit more. South Croydon obviously know Braden is an absolute star, and they try to get it into his hands as much as often. And I think in terms of impact and sort of assistance to his team in their actual game, I think he probably has. In terms of an impact on his own team, he would be the number one.
Is there anything that he does particularly different to, say, an Alex Urban or an Answorth or even any other, top line midfielder in the comp?
Yeah, again, it's quite close in terms of, I think him and Alex are sort of similar in being contested beasts and using their hands quite well. I think the thing that differentiates him is just his scoring involvements and goal assists. So he's obviously getting back a little bit, but then he's helping the team score, whether it be through himself scoring or through actually having that goal assist. And I think that's probably one of the hardest things to have in footy is that goal assist. We harp on inside 50 efficiency, and that probably only sits around 50%. So to be number one in the comp for goal assists when it's usually such a tough kick to do, is credit to him, because more times than not his goal assists are from the midfield or from the half forward line going inside 50. So.
You also probably expect the number one goal assist player to either be a half forward player or maybe a wingman or something like that that gets the ball on the outside. Yeah,
absolutely. So I think even historically, looking at other leagues, like a big centre half forward or a half forward flanker that's sort of getting it in, even forward pockets sometimes quite good, or a big full forward is usually someone that they kick goals, but they also assist them quite often as well. So
yeah, you see that in the AFL, like a Hawkins or something like that. They are often quite high in that area.
Absolutely, yeah. So for a midfielder to do that, it's quite a good feat to hold, and shows that he's a team player. As much as he does rack the ball up and sort of dominate for his team, he still looks to include his other players and sort of get the ball to them and help them out as much as he can.
Which brings me to my next point. The probably glaring omission here in that list is the lack of forwards. Why do you think the forwards don't get into that top five? Yeah,
I think it's quite similar to sort of what we see in the AFL in terms of like a Charlie Curnow or something like that. There's no saying that they don't have an impact on the game. I think, someone like an Adrian Kalkosky might have the biggest impact on a game if he kicks 6 goals like he did on the weekend. And things like that. I think it's purely just because it's more so, they're taking marks, they're kicking goals. But for someone like a Kalkosky, like he's having 12 touches and kicking goals, as much as that is, it could be best on ground and having that impact. In terms of giving score for that, it doesn't score too well, purely because he's not getting things like clearances, he's not getting that many contested possessions. Sort of the things that rate highly in our system, which may look at why they're sort of the midfielders and the ruckmen are getting a little bit more of the points. But absolutely, I don't think that takes anything away from in terms of impact that forwards can have. I think it's just naturally midfielders get a bit more of the ball and have a bit more contested, opposed to like a half forward or definitely a full forward as well.
So that's probably that point where the mass sort of outweighs the the impact to some extent. You did talk about the fact that when, say, a Kalkowski wins the ball higher up the field, he does get rewarded for that, but the guys getting 30, 40 touches a game, that might outweigh that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's one thing to look at. Like he's obviously first in goal involvements. He's kicked the most goals. He's taken, I think, he's top 3 for inside 50 marks this year as well. So I think in that third of the ground, he's probably the best player in the comp. And to be honest, scoring and putting score on the board is what you're supposed to do in footy. So in terms of impact, it is. And I think sometimes the numbers can outweigh to sort of disfavour the forwards in a sense, because they're not, as a forward, your job's not to have 40 touches, 30 touches and win 10 to 15 clearances. It's more so just to kick goals when your time sort of comes up, have an impact and just put the score on the board as well. So that's probably where that.
Yeah, we spoke about it before with, someone in the AFL, maybe like a Charlie Cameron who doesn't get mass touches, but he can kick, 3 or 4 goals with a few touches. So it's probably similar to that situation. So we talked about Kalkowski there. So on Vermont, no players for them in that top 5. Is that surprising?
A little bit. I think in terms of how Vermont play, they don't, it's not like they have blokes that just absolutely rack it up, get 35, 40 every week. They're a very team-based side, to be honest. I think they're averaging less than 300 disposals a game, which is quite low for a team that's top of the ladder.
What does that tell you?
I think, to be honest, with Vermont, they just surge the ball forward. They're a very good territory team. So they sort of focus on, getting the ball forward, and they're very skillful with it. So they're not wasting it too much. They all back themselves as well. I think that's probably one of the biggest things, You've got a whole midfield group working together, that they all back themselves. They all back each other getting the ball. That sort of, no matter who gets it, they're going to get it forward and they're going to have an effective disposal. And more often than not, they're putting that score on the board as well.
So would you say that game style with the, knock it on, surge it on, get it forward, take the territory, is that sort of similar to that style we've seen with like a Richmond in the AFL, where it's less important to control the ball and more just to take the territory? Yeah,
absolutely. And even similar to like a Collingwood of last year, sort of when they were coming up and coming. I think it's a very team-based sort of role that they play. And that's obviously been drilled in by the coaches and stuff like that as well. And I think it, again, comes down to the players buying in and saying, okay, I don't want to be the one that's flashy getting 35 touches. I just want to win. I want to get the ball forward and just win a game of footy. And I think that's reflected as well. Obviously, they're good offensively and defensively. And I think it's just a really good balance across the board. They don't really have too many blokes that, aren't doing anything when they're playing. So I think that balance is probably the reason why none of their players are in the top 5 or anything like that as well.
Yeah, there's so many players just sort of doing their job, really. Exactly right. Really impressed with them a few weeks ago as well. So we'll stay on Vermont. They lost 2 of their first 3 games, have now only dropped 1 since then. Most of the EFNL media team didn't tip them to make the finals. They didn't make the finals last year. We'll start with the difference in the start of the season to what we're up to now and the way that they're playing now. What's the biggest difference that's turned their season around?
Yeah, so I guess comparing rounds, 1 to 3 to then 4 to 14, where we're at the moment, was just their differentials in efficiencies. So I guess if you look at their inside 50 efficiency, so their forward 50 entry, whether it be a handball or kick going inside 50, in rounds 1 to 3, they were going at 43% with that specific disposal. Whereas rounds 4 to 14, they're going at 60% now. So 17% increase in that is absolutely massive. There hasn't been a massive change in their inside 50 numbers, so they're still winning the ball just as well as they were early days. And they actually had more contested possessions in those first 3 games on an average basis than they have in their last 10. But that extra 17% in forward 50 sort of effectiveness has then correlated into an 8% increase in score efficiency. So basically how many times we're scoring per inside 50 as well. So that's increased by 8%. And that sort of has worked across the whole way around the ground. So even their defensive 50 exit efficiency, the start of the year rounds 1 to 3, that was negative 3% to their opposition, whereas that's now plus 9.5%, which is, again, just showing that they're outworking their opponents and that they're using the ball a lot more effectively. And again, defensive 50 exit is sort of one of the most important kicks as well.
So does that show you that they've improved probably more ball movement? They've dropped off in the contests, but probably because they haven't had to win as many contests.
Yeah.
And they've improved their ball movement.
Absolutely. So I think, again, it just comes back to backing themselves. And the efficiencies obviously paint a picture. If you're winning more games, naturally you're going to be better at the efficiencies. But to see such a big difference like this, I think it's a great showing that they are surging the ball forward, and it's almost in a sense a bit of that chaos footy. Yes, they are skillful, but they're sort of getting the ball up the ground and just backing in their other players up the ground. Again, it comes to that team balance and sort of having a belief in everyone. It's not like they're trying to, just chip around the back line and sort of maintain possession. They're like, okay, we've got the ball, we're going, we're going to try to score.
It shows you what a good job the coach is doing, because you do look at their team and it doesn't jump off the page with stars.
Yep.
And yeah, just doing a really great job. How do you think you beat them? Is there a strategy to come up against that game? Is it high pressure? Is it controlling the footy? What would you do to beat them?
It is a very interesting one, because Vermont aren't necessarily a high tackle team as well. I think they're in the bottom 5 in the competition. So I think one thing to note, without being too, don't want to give too many tips away for Vermont's point of view, but they are quite heavy from centre bounce. So they're 19%, 19% of their scores have been from centre bounce this year, which is absolutely massive. The second in the competition is 12%. So it's quite ridiculous what they can do. They're quite even with their clearances in terms of overall clearances, including boundary throw-ins and around the ground bounce. But just their dominance at centre clearance and ability to turn that into like overall score.
Is that like a clean, when you say they score from the clearance, is that you win a clearance, you get a clean entry, a mark inside 50 and you score? Or is it just getting it inside 50, trapping it in and scoring eventually?
No, absolutely. So that's actually scoring without a stoppage or a turnover in between.
Yeah, straight from the stoppage.
Yeah.
Wow. So does their style of football, do you think that's something that can stand up in finals, and is it sustainable to score that much from clearance?
Yeah, I think it is. One thing we sort of noticed, we actually had a few interns and stuff do some work on this. I think the biggest thing for them, obviously, the sort of surge football that they play and high pressure. I think the best part of it is that if you get down by 2-3 goals, you're still in the game. You can back yourselves.
See that with Collingwood?
Yeah, exactly right. And it is sort of a similar game style in a sense, obviously at a very different level. And I'm sure they probably don't necessarily base their footy off that, but that's sort of just how it turns out to be in terms of that and sort of being in every game. I think they're very sound defensively, which obviously all premiership teams and final teams definitely need. But then on top of that as well, their ability to sort of counter-attack, score from clearances is a massive one, especially those centre clearances. They can kick a goal, get back to the centre, and then they go, okay, well, we know we can score straight away now. So that's probably the biggest one. And absolutely their game style can match up in finals. I think in the big games this year, they've already shown that they can beat the other big teams. Obviously, they've knocked off Ballwin twice and stuff like that. So absolutely, you can match up in finals.
I think they've only got one more big scalp to go, and that's if they beat East Ringwood, the local rival. So that's a big one. So looking at that top 6, obviously Vermont on top. Is there anyone in that top 6 that you think might be vulnerable, like their game's not in great shape heading into the final?
Yeah, I think, the last couple of weeks, obviously East Ringwood have lost a couple of games, but to be honest, I think they're probably the best matchup for Vermont. So it's a bit contradictory in saying that, and I think when they verse Vermont, they'll definitely come out strong and obviously have the confidence from when they smashed them earlier in the year as well. So I sort of like a Rowville as well in the top 6, that they match up quite well. And I know they got done the other week, but I think they're sort of good things in terms of that. And then even a Berwick, sort of who knows what's happening with them at the moment. They've won 4 in a row. And they're sort of similar. Defensively, they've been massive at the moment.
So you see them as a possible bolter maybe in this last part of the season?
I think they almost have nothing to lose in a sense. They're sort of 2-8 at one stage, and now they're 6-8. So talk early in the year was about getting relegated, whereas now they're sort of a chance for finals and sort of out of that relegation talk. And yeah, as I said, they've just got momentum. Obviously beat Noble on the weekend, which is a massive scalp, and they just have to keep working and moving forward too.
We've talked about the good story in Vermont turning their season around, but we have to touch on South Croydon. Prelim final last year. They've got the number one ranked player that we just discussed in Braden Kilpatrick. Now they've recently, coaches walked away. What has changed since last year? And in the relegation zone now, what's gone wrong for them?
I think if you look at just basic disposal efficiency and things like that, their ability to maintain control of the ball. So last year they were averaging just over 100 marks per game, which has dropped to about 77 this year. Disposals quite similar, 335 to 300 this year. So
they are a high disposal team. They're still doing that. It's just the efficiency that you're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think they're averaging 35 less disposals than last year, which is not a great deal in that sense. But I suppose in terms of marks, 23 less than 100. It's a 23% decrease on last year. So even though they are still maintaining the ball and stuff like that, they're not having that control on the game. And then you look at the teams at the top of the ladder that are contested beast teams and sort of love the hard footy. That they're bringing it to the ground a bit more often than they have been in the past, and it's meaning that they force more turnovers, and their sort of disposals aren't as impactful. And I think the big thing for them as well is they're struggling to get it inside 50, and then when they are, they're not using it as well either.
Would you say we had Braden Kilpatrick as their number one ranked player? Is he having to do probably too much in that team? And it's like we talked about Vermont, how much they share it around. Is that one of the biggest differences there? Yeah,
potentially. I think his stats obviously speak for how high of a class player he is. And who knows if he had other guys around him that were also racking it up, that they could be a really strong team. So I don't think necessarily his stats are too much. I think his stats would be really good, but as you said, the support around him is probably not.
Is it potentially a lack of system?
Potentially, I think, yeah, maybe a lack of a buy-in potentially. They're still a good team. They're still very competitive. So I think their percentage is about 80%.
Yeah.
By no means they're getting smashed in games, so they're still right in games. And I think it might just come down to a confidence thing and backing yourself at the end of the day. And I guess the top teams are sort of trusting their system a little bit more.
If you're a new coach coming in there, say they put you in, what are you going to do to fix that up from the way that they're playing now, to maybe just come in, do something really simple that just gets them back to win a couple of games to try and jump out of that relegation zone?
I think, if you base it off Vermont, I think just getting territory. I think if you're getting the ball forward and backing yourselves in, at the end of the day, that's the best way to play footy. As much as you want, you can chip the ball around your back half. You can have 300 disposals that aren't really impactful.
You look at it and you think maybe they just need to really simplify it, and some of those lesser known players, rather than telling them to go and hunt the ball or whatever, just play a role, play those like half forwards that get up the ground and that sort of thing, and it might be able to just get them all like working in unison together and have that synergy back. I want to move on to Ballwin next. Ex-AFL coach has come in Brenton Sanderson. They're a really high possession team, but they haven't sort of fully clicked into gear. I think most of, again, the public sort of think that they're one of the big contenders, but they haven't really shown us, I think, everything that they can do so far. So what do you see about their game?
Yeah, as you said, obviously quite very contested, to be honest, and they have plenty of the ball. So there's no troubles in their ball winning or maintaining possession of the ball. I think their correlation to scoring and actually getting the ball inside 50 was probably one thing that we picked up on was sort of the biggest, especially when compared to versing the good teams. So against Noble, they had 30 less inside 50s, 22 less inside 50s against Vermont, and 10 less against Doncaster East. So they're quite heavy numbers. They might be just as efficient when they're going inside, but they're just not getting it forward as much.
I had a look at them earlier in the year. They had a match of the day, and at that point, they did, it was still the same. So they had low inside 50s, but they did score a lot when they went inside. Is that something that's continued on?
Yeah, it is. So they are quite efficient when they're going in. I'd say average, they're not necessarily really good or really bad. But I think the one thing to point out as well, obviously their goal accuracy has sort of caused a little bit of this, but against Vermont earlier in the year, 34, they scored a total of 34 points. Noble Park, they scored 46. Doncaster East 32, and then Vermont the second time 60. So it's hard to win a game of footy if you're not scoring 50 points. for one, but it doesn't matter how good your defence is. Naturally, if you're not scoring, over 50 points, more often than not, you're going to lose. So they are very strong, and I think for them, all it takes is just for that last forward 50 entry to click, and actually get the ball forward. Again, just comes back down to territory and having the ball in the right spots. If they can do that, they'll be very dangerous when finals come around.
One of the things that stood out to me with them watching them live was they'd win the ball at the clearance through guys like Urban that we spoke about, and then they like to flick that handball around to get the ball out into space, and that would probably be a reason for their good inside 50s, because they get the ball out into space. But on that particular day, they were playing Noble Park, who really brought intense pressure, and that seemed to completely take them off their game. They couldn't find that handball to put them into space, and that sort of fell apart for them a bit. So it does worry me watching that their game might not stand up to the pressure of finals. Yeah,
absolutely. And you see there, I suppose the opposition's pressure has been the highest in the games where they've scored the least, whether that be defensive pressure and putting pressure on them when they're getting shots at goals. And I think as well, they're probably not taking the best shots on goal that they could be. So, maybe having a best shot mentality or something like that would help. But again, they're only small things. They're obviously sitting second for a reason. So, I still think come finals and the high pressure, I think because of how contested they are, they'll still be right up there as a contender.
All right, Ryan, thanks for joining me today. Really appreciate your time. That'll be a wrap from us. If you guys have any questions, we'd love to hear your feedback, so leave those in the comments, and we'll see you next time.